description to thick interpretation. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's so nice to look out and see a few familiar faces, and but also to meet all of you, and especially I think the doctoral students, because that was, and researchers, new researchers, because that's where my head was at as I revised and rethought my presentation for today. So let me get the, I think there's some weird screen here which says, oh, did you get me connected?
Yes, I think you just fell asleep.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
laptop.
sleeping. It doesn't have any right to go to sleep. Okay, so I'm starting off with a cartoon. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not a truth. And as you can see, oops, where's the pointer part? Is there a pointer?
The red, the top.
Oh, the red.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. And as you can see here, if you look from this perspective, you see 4 things. If you look from this perspective, you see 3. And sort of that's, and this is a quote by, I thought it was funny to pick something by Marcus Aurelius at the beginning of the first millennium. And it's not that, I'm not sure if I agree with the quote at all, so it's not like you should get too hooked on this, but because it's like not everything, there can be facts, obviously, and there can be truth likenesses, but I thought it was a good way to sort of get us into seeing research as something that's co-constructed and is shared among different collaborators, but also with the participants. So that's sort of my opening line, and that tells you a little bit about myself and this thing. Now, you might want to move it as I move, because I'm going to move a lot. I won't be like Trump, I promise. No stalking involved. Okay, so I'm going to do a short primer on the talk. And the primer is to talk a little bit about ethnography. And so I'm sure some of you know that it's a description, interpretation, representations about what researchers experience when they are involved, that's the key word, or participating, as you would say, with the day-to-day lives of people carrying out their own routines and lives, participating in a culture. Ethnographic accounts help readers and viewers to understand the meaning of events by small or large groups. More important, the accounts can be used by the groups being studied to learn more about each other's perspectives, to find agreements, maybe even broker and arrange an agreement or a contract with each other. So truth is not the aim of ethnography, at least not in the postmodern world that we live in, or the post-post. And also that means that you can include the research, the people who are the participants in your study, to actually partake as researchers. And I've done that with matter of fact, I got the idea because I was in a school for many years, at the Hennigan School, my very first ethnography back in the 1980s, which sounds ancient. Some of you probably weren't born. But in any case, and John said to me while I was videotaping, he said, "Ricki, just give me the camera and I'll show what it's really like when you're not here." And I thought, because I was in the classroom, I was outside in the pods, and that stuck with me. And although that school wouldn't have permitted it, I actually have worked quite a bit with giving the young people the camera and for making their own representations about the content we were studying, mostly in a study about Clayoquot Sound, an endangered rainforest in British Columbia. So these methods they tend to embrace, not everybody thinks this way, but they tend to embrace socially activist-oriented critical methods, whose aim it is to empower mainstream communities through exposing hegemonic tendencies by the dominant culture. And that's where things have gone over the last couple of days, especially with feminist postmodern challenges to the traditional anthropological notions of culture And so this brought in all kinds of new questions and new concerns about colonialism, sexism, racism, and here we are today in the midst of exactly these kinds of issues. It seems like they don't get solved, but hopefully they move in time with fundamental changes that might be able to happen in the next couple of weeks. But I'm the Canadian, I don't vote, so I'm not biased at all. But I do have a perspective. So, DBE and learning. So how did the strong activist roots of the learning sciences communities of the 1990s change to the extent that it has? And I think by not having an equally vibrant and viable alternative to quantitative methods that focus mostly on assessments and predictions. And I don't mean to say that this is wrong about assessments, certainly not theoretically driven ones, but this complete sort of forgetting, like amnesia, of all kinds of other methods and tools that they are, from PAR, from grounded research, even problem-based learning and project-based learning, although I do think that those methods are very focused on ends. In fact, I would say the learning science, sadly, has been focusing on the ends to be effective, to have evidence-based, all the kinds of things which really help people get funding because that's what the government wants. So, anyway, so why are we less interested as a culture in cultural change, as a learning culture in the learning sciences? And why have we not promoted ethnographic accounts in our field? Why is this happening? So it's odd because in our online communities we have become more focused, just the ones that we go to, Facebook, etc., on ourselves. But in the learning sciences, we may feel we don't need to communicate with each other by using narratives that move, that inspire, that provoke, that give pleasure. So we're not doing pleasurable research. We're not doing those kinds of research possibilities. And I think what I'm saying today, I know what I'm saying today, is that we have lost something very precious. And that's why the title of my talk today is Rekindling. And then over the next phase of my academic career, that's exactly what I'm going to do, is rekindle. Oh, there, I'm back to this. Oh, well, whatever. I'll have to just keep coming back and forth. Okay, so unfortunately, ethnographic, progressive, and social justice streams of thinking about knowledge, for example, Foucault says, like, whose knowledge is this? Clifford and Marcus say, maybe we don't have truths, we have partial truths. Maybe that's good enough. Clifford Geertz says we need local knowledge. And these threads are not being picked up. And maybe you could just say, well, Ricki, just start another thread. I've been involved in a lot of new things. So maybe we just start a different organization of socially activist, ethnographic research right now as it happens. So we took this, I argue in this short little paper that I wrote for you, was that we took this pivot, I believe, I'm saying I believe because, there's no empirical evidence for this, but I bet there would be, somewhere around the beginning of the Bush administration, when everything became very evidence-based. I remember Roy P. got up at a conference at ARA, and he said, in our SIG, and he said, listen, we have to get our act together and we have to start doing a different kind of research because it's definitely going to be about testing again. And what it seems to me what we really want in our hearts, and that's what I'm talking about today, a lot about the heart. We want learners to know the content and the context of what we're teaching them. And we want them to love that they're learning as much as all of us who are here loved our learning. because in fact we wouldn't be here if we didn't love our learning. Something pulled us in. So, and also we found in our learning a place to be ourselves, to take something and to be able to express ourselves more fully within this particular arena that we play in. So why is there this denial of accepting learners where they are, when most of us were trained in mathematics, science, and computer education, and we loved it, and so why aren't we sharing that? So what's the result of all of this? We're now 15 years into the Learning Sciences, the Journal of Learning Sciences. I mean, I remember the very first meetings we had at ARA to establish this journal. Seems to me that, you know, we've let it slide, let that other side slide. So, and the result is that the process of learning has been lost. Yes, it's been archived, and some of it's been coded, and we get results now, and we even get, you know, guidelines for how to make fundamental changes, but we're not really looking at process. And we're not looking at learning is a continually evolving, sort of shifting narrative. And my thesis for today, if you haven't already figured out, is how to regain that. So, what have we lost? Well, I'm going to tell you. So, where's the voice? Where's the voice of those we study? Where is the image? Where is the imagination? Where is the creativity of helping, of the act of being an instructor, a teacher, a mentor, etc., etc.? And how can we actually get back to hearing students and the people that are studying them as they were at that time? So I want you to think for a moment. There's a little exercise. Think for a little moment about how you use Facebook. And you know how they have this little feature that you can go back 3 years or 1 year and you can see what was happening. So what do you feel about that? Is that interesting to you? Not interesting? Like, what happens when it pops up on your screen? A year ago I was doing this, or 3 years ago I was doing that. Today. Anything? This is your turn.
Yeah, I like it. I like that feature.
And why?
Well, so it's kind of interesting, right? It's a microcosm of your life, right? So sometimes it's a personal thing that happened, sometimes it's a professional thing that happened. It reminds you of important benchmarks. And it, you know, of course, it's depends on how you use Facebook, right? Some people use it in a very specific context, but for me, I like the things that have popped up.
And do you see it differently now than when you experienced it and posted it that day? Sometimes? Like let's say your kid's growing up, or your pet. You know, now he was then young and now he's older, or your kids were here and now your kids are here, or they're going off to high school and all of a sudden they're married.
Right.
So do you now, as the person you are now, having had so many more experiences and having changed from that, do you look at that differently?
I don't look at it differently, but I think that it's interesting to sort of mark time, you know. So there was this interesting thing that popped up recently about a snowstorm that had happened in New England that caused us to have to leave and go to our little house in the Berkshires. And at that time, I met my daughter's roommate, who she's now marrying. And that popped up, right?
Right.
So that popped up. It's like, oh, this is when we first met Chris, who
Right.
was living in a house with Adrian and a bunch of kids, undergrads, right?
Right.
And, you know, they're getting married next year. It was just kind of interesting how that happens, right? So that was.
So there was. Would you say there's an arc of a story that you experienced
Right.
in some way?
Yeah.
Anybody else have a similar experience? Nobody?
I sometimes don't remember posting the thing that pops up, like the photograph or the stats. I'm like, oh, is that how, you know? And sometimes it drives my memory. And sometimes I'm like, I don't even remember that being a sort of notable moment when I think back on my own experience.
so is it a pleasant experience to be reminded of something that you sort of forgot that was not accessible to you?
Usually, I would say it's usually pleasurable, and sometimes it's neutral or extra information, but it's not ever a negative experience.
Anything else? Yes. And can you introduce yourself so I know who you are?
I'm Brian.
Hi, Brian. And you? Sorry, go ahead.
Sometimes it reminds me that I wanted things to happen in the future of that past moment, and some of those things have happened and some of them haven't, so it helps me recommit to those plans.
How interesting.
Or
So
reassess and say like, oh, some of those were silly. Maybe
So there is a little bit of a predictive notion, like let's say if you were an ethnographer and you were looking back over your data, which you have access to, you could actually see it again and say, oh, I was really involved in that particular place with that child, and are there threads now that I want to come back to and revisit? So this notion of video and video ethnography as being something we can revisit to tell an arc of a story is very important. So thank you for your comments. I had a very similar experience with Hurricane Sandy. The other day it popped up that, this memory and what I wrote when I was surrounded almost all by water. I lived in Jersey City, right on the waterfront, and you just looked out and there was water around our building, and to the point where I went to the garage and I looked out of the garage. It was a high garage, it's not a deep garage, and there's an opening, and I look over here and I see the water like 2 inches below my nose, and then I say to myself, Ricki, one more surge and it's bye-bye. Get out of here. What am I doing? Because it kept surging and surging. And it did have that kind of, there was a fear now that I was reminded of, but I had some other experiences with which to look at it and to think about how it is that we move through difficult times. And our kids move through, like learning is a difficult process. And then once we've done it and some time has gone by, we can revisit it. And in fact, that's such a wonderful thing for us to be reminded of, what we accomplished by what we experienced rather than receiving only numerical evaluations. So I'm going to go on with this. I wrote it a little bit differently here, but that's okay. So for many years we've had technologies not only to measure and calculate, they're certainly the big data is certainly here to stay, and for good reason. There is a statistical analysis that we would like to maintain. I'm not sure the statisticians are also happy about big data, but then that's another story because they say they've been doing that all along. But I understand that data sciences is not that, because now I work with 3 fantastic learning scientists that we just hired at NYU. Alyssa Wise, whose work I really recommend, June An, and Yoav Bergman. Really, you'll hear a lot about them in the coming years. So, okay. So, what about, I'm going to talk about today, I know we don't have all that much time. When does this end?
12:45.
Okay, 12:45. So,
I mean, there's a little wiggle room though.
yeah. And I can, when I'm saying something, just jump in. Really, I actually like that. I mean, I don't worry about being interrupted. I spent my life being interrupted in my family, so I'm quite used to it. Is that too much information? It's a joke. Okay. I would do it anyways. So there's a few things I want to talk to you about today. And I'm actually not going to address so much the big data story, because for the last couple of days I've been working on my presentation to you and rereading and looking at a very interesting book called Weapons of Mass Destruction, which is really a brilliant little yellow book. So I think it's worth taking a look at. But then I realized that I'm not there yet to really share my process, because I'm in this process and working with other people on trying to figure out how not to be distracted by the big data thing and the data science is, but rather to try to keep one's eyes and ears open to the sounds of different methodological strains that are not just that, I mean, not just ethnography and digital video ethnography, which I'm here to talk about, of course, but grounded research, participatory action, all the kinds of, and now especially with all these different tools we have available to us, I mean, maybe there are ways to have body sensors and to learn not for measuring how excited somebody is and their emotional, I mean, that part really doesn't seem to me to be leading to where we really want it to go, but to have young people reflect on the fact that they are biologically excited because their body starts sweating or something. Like a study I did with Jocelyn Schreier, about 10 years ago, more, 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. She's from MIT, the Media Lab, and she came and we worked with these kids. And they told us stories of when they were in having discussions with their friends, or somebody maybe who was bullying them, or maybe some parent who was really after them to do something. And when the person saw on their, it was a little galvactic thing, and it shone really brightly. When it went really red, then you knew that the person was perspiring internally. And one mother looked at her kid and she said, "Okay, why don't we talk about this another time, dear? Like, let's move this discussion." So, and it was like those kinds of experience I find very valuable. Okay, so, and basically I want to talk about quizzitive work today, which is a term, I've written about this. By the way, all my references, pretty much all my references are in back of the paper, the PDF that I sent you, so you can share it with everybody, all my notes and the PDF and with the references on it. And so quizzitive is not quantitative or qualitative. I was trying to think of a way that we could, years ago, about how we could have, when we start a research project, we could start looking at the quantitative process, whichever one picks, and then the qualitative context process, and then have students build from that a new column, which would be quizzitive. So at certain point, now it wouldn't be a one-to-one matching, but it would be a way in which you could not only just be doing qualitative research and add some quantitative, or quantitative research and add some qualitative. It would be a way to bring these two, to have a conversation throughout the process. So yes, you might do a questionnaire. There might be qualitative responses that people give you that you want to note. On the other hand, it doesn't stop you from doing the other method. So that is quizzitive, because quiz, the word is like, it was kind of cute. I like finding words that, quiz, like quizzes, and inquisitive. So these are sort of the poles. One is trying to test something, and the other is curious about a phenomenon, like in phenomenology, and you want to find out, you want to dig around and find out what's going on so that you could actually help people in that culture make the changes they need to make for themselves. Okay, so any questions so far? Because now I start the more formal part of my lecture, so I'll give you a moment to think about that. Anything that pops into your mind, or should I just plow in? Plow?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'll stand. Perhaps you might want to move that. And it doesn't matter if we get this, because people can have the paper. Okay. Rekindling digital video ethnographic research in the age of social media. Notice that the discussion will be more on the big data, from thick description to interpretation. I wanted to tell you or show you that I do have a background in these different areas. Things that are even of more significance for me now are the gender and technology. Also, I'm working with Jocelyn once again on wearables and designing some kind of ring or thing that you can use when you're in a VR world and you're trying to communicate with each other. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but on also this big data, I'm sort of mucking around in the big data world. My background and the labs I've run, and these are the major ethnographies I've conducted. The Hennigan study was probably the longest, which was 5 years. 3 years of which was data collection. The Bayside Middle School, also 3 years pretty much. And this is where the girls, John here is the same John I talked about before. By the way, we're Facebook friends by his request after all those years. So he's now in his mid-30s. It's really wonderful. And Bayside Middle School, which was in Vancouver, where the kids studied Clayoquot Sound and environmentally endangered space, and on the west coast of Vancouver Island. You're smiling? No. From Vancouver?
Not from Vancouver Island.
Oh, okay. Well, me too. Born in Winnipeg, then went to Vancouver. Then the Integrated Science Project, which was an undergrad interdisciplinary research project with students at the university. Burnsview Junior High School and a middle school. Anyways, let's have a 5 here because they used to all have numbers, in case you're. So these are the theoretical highlights that I have. Oh, you have a whole copy of this, so I don't have to keep looking at it. Did you print out the full copy too? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll refer to it down here. So what you can see is this, I guess, trajectory, my own personal trajectory, but also I think because the culture and the tools and were available and ready for this, have always moved through this notion of going from social perspectivism, digital video ethnography, which is these are terms that I coined many years ago, points of viewing, because we not only now have a point of viewing, but all of us can look at, so we have, first of all, each person has a different point of view about different things and at different times. So, but also, so that's the points, but it's also collaboratively points. And viewing, because it's not just a view, it's an active word, it's a gerund, points of viewing. So, and then in a book I authored with colleagues, you'll see, Ricki, Sharon Derry, and Bridget Barron. I talked a lot about the perspective framework. So points of viewing is a theory, whereas the perspectivity framework is a methodology. And that's how I separated them in my work. Digital video design ethnography, which I coined in 2004, was also coined almost identically by Sasha Barab in an article. We published parallel with no connection. I mean, although we knew each other's work. And so, but his was critical digital design or something like that. I can't quite remember. But so it was in the zeitgeist at this time. And anyways, and these are the tools that I have worked on over the years. So why is constellation a metaphor for thinking about how we view research data? So if you just think about, you see a constellation from your own galaxy being situated where you are, and the stars sort of look where they are. But if you were in a different galaxy, obviously, different stars, the constellations would be differently arranged. Because just imagine pulling yourself out, pulling yourself there. So it was a way of saying that maybe how our brains work, how we gather information, that we are gathering different chunks of things, making sense of them, and then when we put them into the universe, we express them to other people in all kinds of forms, we begin to see overlapping layers, patterns of what things they put in what kind of order. So you and I go to the same movie, but we've seen 10 other movies before that resonate and make this movie a different experience. So it's that kind of trying to get at self and how the mind works, and also connecting it neurologically and both on the neural level and also on the sort of the way of understanding the universe. So that's what I've been working on, and that metaphor has helped me in the design of all of my software over the years. So last year I was giving, need somebody to, you know how people turn pages? When someone else comes, I'll just stand here. So last year I was in Paris and I was giving a talk at the Sorbonne, which was really fun for me because my uncle went there, so it was like one of those little check marks in my life that I sort of was very exciting for me. In any case, I went to a bookstore and a museum, and I found all these interesting things in books about visualizations. And I just thought, wow, they kind of look very star-like and constellation-like to me. And this one was even called Constellations, because it is constellations, pictures of it. And this is a galaxy. And so over the years, I designed a lot of different software. And one of them went with a book called Points of View in Children's Thinking. And it was so that you could be reading the book and interacting with the research. And in fact, you had Deborah Raimundo, a teacher in some school, who got her kids to watch the video and then talk about what they liked about the kids in the Hennigan school. So, and then they added all these comments. And I remember one of them was like, was just all about how exciting it was to see someone else learning what they were learning, and anyways, and using these kinds of technologies. So these, I'll just run through these. This was constellations, after learning constellations. You can see that there's a database. This was as big as the database was at the time, but you could do searches. You could do searches in the database and find out. So this was the result of the database. You clicked on that, and then the video came up, and then you had your topics and participants. I mean, this is circa 1990, so it's a long time ago. This was that was earlier. This was web constellations. So, and this was a way that you could not only just put a video, but you could put up any kind of data together and cluster them, all on one page. It was a mess. It had to all open up in different windows. You couldn't really do interactivity. It was way too much for what was available at the time. And then Orion, and then this was the last tool I designed before I realized that if I didn't get $5 million from someone, I was never going to be able to compete. Finally, I just sort of like the bell clicked. It's called Orion Beta, and you log in, and let me use this here. I'll just use my fingers and then click here. So you log in, you have your regular projects, you can delete projects. You can also, you have your projects, but you can invite people into your projects, and you can decide what authority they have to make changes in that. It was working really nicely too. So I used the CSCL 2005 conference in Taiwan to give a demonstration of this. So you can see how there were the main you could see that these collections, which are basically also constellations, could be added, and the video you could bring in would go into a side desk. And now you can see it's not one person, but there are 4 people in that community, and they can all do some rating on these. So I'll just come back to, so here they could put in creativity, tangibility, whatever else. This is Hiroshi Ishii talking. And that you could also set a numerical code. So there was a rating of 1 to 10. Now it didn't mean 1 to 10 just anything like or dislike. It meant that you as a community would decide what does 1 to 10 mean, and then you would start seeing them and pulling them together. So it was I don't know, it was 2017 or 2005, I mean. It was quite a while ago. So, what does this mean for researchers today in the learning sciences? I already talked about this. And now I want to perhaps fill in some blanks. So, why was it that there was this convergence in the learning sciences? And how did we get from studying the individual mind to beginning to look at the social mind? I usually give an entire lecture on this, but when you look at theorists such as Piaget and not Vygotsky, Piaget, and even Seymour Papert, who was a constructionist, not a constructivist, we can see that there was always this interest in the mind of a child. And almost all the research, even if it was done either experimentally or in observations, because Piaget did both, what you could see was that there was this focus on the mind, on one mind, but it didn't do anything about the interactions with teachers, with other students, the social mind. And so, so I think after the cognitive revolution, after all kinds of other processes, which I can't do a cog-sci lecture right now, but anyways, what you begin to see is all of a sudden there's an organization called Computer Supported Collaborative.